saying in my talk, to be honest with you, I'm not really sure what you mean by non-duality or what that word means, but I think probably, if I do understand it at all, probably Zen is a non-dual tradition in the sense that there's no difference between the relative and the absolute. The profound depth of spiritual life, the spirit, and ordinary everyday life are one thing. If that's what you mean by non-duality, then Zen is pretty much all about that. How do we integrate those things fully so that there is no difference, there is no such thing as religious or spiritual life as opposed to ordinary everyday life. And there is no ordinary everyday life that doesn't also evoke and reference the deepest within us. And so mostly in Zen, it's a matter of training our hearts and minds to be fully present in each moment. The more we can be fully present in each moment, as it really is, whatever's happening in that moment, even if it's a moment of anguish or a moment of confusion, if we can be there fully with it, then everything is there. We've evoked the truth of everything in that moment by being fully present. Being fully present in this moment is not a hedonistic present, which forget the past, forget the future. The present moment includes the whole of the past and all the seeds of the future. So it's a moment of depth. And so really the main thing is, can you be there, fully there for everything that happens in your life? And if that's what you mean by non-duality, then that's what we practice. Well, the teachings are always saying that over and over again in so many ways. If you just are present with what you're doing, you just are there studying this or meditating in that moment, then it's not a matter of I'm meditating so that, or I am meditating. It's more like this is occurring in this moment, everything is here. And there's no way to not do something. In other words, life is every moment something's going on. And so there's no difference between engaging in so-called practice, a meditation retreat, let's say, and leaving the meditation retreat and driving home on the highway. These are both practice, and we're present for each of them. And so we're always talking about, because of course, we always do think there's someone doing something, and we always do think that we're doing something for a reason. And so the teachings are always reminding us that, yeah, that is how we think, and that it's thinking that way and living that way that causes us our suffering. So can you recontextualize and reframe your living and continue living perhaps exactly the same life, but with a different understanding and a different way of holding it. So as far as I understand the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, it's very similar in terms of how we understand. But in Soto Zen, there's a big value and appreciation for the formal elements of practice, which may be something different in Advaita Vedanta. So we enjoy and appreciate our practice as an expression, not so that we can be Buddha, so that we can do the right thing, but as an expression of our already being Buddha and of already coming forth in the right way. To express that, we really appreciate and enjoy the practice that we do. Suzuki Roshi, the founder of our school, always used the term gaining idea. When you practice with a gaining idea, trying to get something, trying to make something happen, you suffer. And so you try to practice, as I said, just with a feeling of appreciation. And as you're implying, it's hard to do that. Usually there is a gaining idea. So I just think it's really a problem being a human being. You know, if you say, practice always makes you suffer, don't practice, then you have a problem. If you say, just practice and people have a gaining idea with the practice, you also have a problem. So there's no escape, one way or the other. We find that we have to try to find a way to become free of our confused minds, and it's always a problem to find the right way. And different people will find different ways that are effective for them. There's a school of Buddhism in Japan that has very similar to Advaita Vedanta in the same way, that they say, well, all Zen practitioners are wrong because there's no way to practice Zen without having a gaining idea. You're trying to get enlightenment, and as soon as you're trying to get enlightenment, you're finished. And so they argue, just like Advaita does, for no form of practice. But in Soto Zen, similar to Advaita, there is not an emphasis on getting enlightenment through the agency of the practice. There's simply an emphasis on the joy of the practice itself as an expression of what we are, rather than as a means to get something that we don't have. Enlightenment in Soto Zen is showing up with our whole heart and our whole intelligence and our whole consciousness in every moment. Enlightenment is not a privileged moment, and it's not an experience. It's living fully on each occasion. That's right. And then, along with that, if you really live that, all the traditional virtues appear. So when you really show up in each moment fully, there's natural kindness, there's compassion, there's intelligence, and so on. It seems that you can't really fully be present and be a bank robber and a murderer. You can be skillful at those things, and you can have a kind of presence, but as soon as there's harmfulness, there's separation. So anyway, that's the feeling that we have in Soto Zen, that, in other words, we often will speak about and cultivate these different virtues. We talk about giving and kind speech and beneficial action and patience and energy and a whole host of virtues, and we have precepts and moral conduct. But the understanding is always that these are the things that arise spontaneously and naturally when you are completely there with your life. And sometimes it might be useful to talk about them and to try to cultivate them, but in the end, they just describe our life when we're completely there with it. One of the things that's beautiful about the Zen tradition, especially Soto Zen, is it's a tradition of encounter. When you think about it, the underlying feeling is the truth only arises between us. All the stories involve people meeting, right? They meet and they exchange words or gestures, and in that something arises that gets us beyond our stuckness and our separation. So it's really a religious literature that's unique in its particular style. And so there are encounter stories of ancient masters, most of them from the Tang and Song dynasties in medieval China, and they carry some of the values and the teachings and the perspectives that's unique to the Zen tradition. The Zen tradition, I think, is a Buddhist tradition, and I don't think from within it there's the idea that it's unique or different. It's just a maybe slightly different form of expression of what's perennial in Buddhism from the beginning. That's the way it looks from inside of Zen. But you're right, it is a very unique and unusual literature because it's so pithy and so short and so non-explanatory. It sort of gives you a feeling for the truth more than explaining the truth. And so in Zen practice, we tell the stories over and over again, we think about them, we talk about them, but mostly we sit and meditate with them. We'll sit for sometimes years breathing with a particular story, reducing it maybe to a phrase or an image, and breathing with it, being with it, until it appears always in our lives. And then somehow it changes our lives. It becomes part of who we are, and it becomes an important experience of understanding our lives. And that's how it works. The Zen tradition in China, let's say, where it comes from, assumes that a practitioner will already have great familiarity with and training in normative Buddhist practice. And so given that, Zen tries to add something that it feels is missing or that could be emphasized more. But for the Western practitioner, you don't have that foundation. And so Zen is pretty much implicit in its teaching about working with emotions and suffering and so on. So I felt that as a Western Zen teacher, it's necessary to add to the Zen curriculum teachings that are more explicit on these points. So Everyday Zen, our group, has a curriculum that includes non-Zen materials from other schools of Buddhism, which particularly emphasize cultivating compassion and how to work with afflictive emotions. And in fact, I'm publishing a book within the next year on my Zen commentaries to a Indo-Tibetan text, which is for the purpose of generating compassion and resilience, because I think Zen students really need to make use of these other teachings, because it's a foundation that, as I say, in China was understood to already be present before the Zen practice began. A typical Zen story will have somebody traveling around with sutras and commentaries, and then he discovers Zen, throws away his sutras and commentaries, and we read the story and we think, oh, the sutras and commentaries that may reference that emotional material are not necessary, failing to realize that, no, first they're digested, then they're gone beyond. So we have to digest that material and find a way to do that, because it's not explicit in Zen. It's very important for Western students to know how to be aware of their emotions and how to work with their emotions as part of their spiritual practice. It's crucial. In Soto Zen, the Japanese founder of Soto Zen, Dogen, who lived from 1200 to 1254, wrote an important essay on time, which is at the center of his teaching. And in addition to that important essay, throughout his teachings, he references time. So you're right, the idea of what is time and how do we live within time and what is the dimensionless quality of time is a really important issue for Dogen in his practice, and for us in Soto Zen. That's really true. And it's a very beautiful essay. It's called Uji in Japanese, which is usually translated as "for the time being," which is kind of, because just like in English, the time being is, when you think about it, a very profound thought, and also a common everyday phrase. Well, I'm just going to do this for the time being. So it's the same in Japanese. So the title of his piece is Uji, and that's what he's saying. He's saying that there is no time as a container in which our lives are fit. Being is time, and therefore there is no birth, there is no death, and there's just time, which is all inclusive. And so to enter any moment of our lives is to enter all of time. Something like that is what he speaks about. But his essay is profoundly poetic and beautiful, and not easily reducible to a couple of phrases like I just did. All of Buddhism implies and comes from a feudalistic social structure, which is embedded everywhere in the teachings. And so the Buddha is at the head of a hierarchy, and the Buddhist rule is a powerful institutionalizes a powerful hierarchy. And while people, when they organize themselves into groups, always set up some form of hierarchy, it seems as if the era that we're living in now, hierarchy is outmoded. It's not really workable. I think that's one of the problems with all the political foment that we've got going on now, is that hierarchy is institutionalized. It's the only way our political system operates, and yet at the same time it's not really the spirit of the age. So yes, we have to find ways of doing Buddhism that recognize this fact, and certainly in my own practice, it's too much to go into, but I've certainly thought about this and tried to institute ways where this would be part of the practice. So just to give one example, in a typical Buddhist format is the teacher gives teachings and students ask questions. But in everyday Zen, it's much more typical for a teacher or sometimes the students to give teachings. And then after the teachings are given, instead of questions, there are dialogue groups. So we'll often put some thoughts out and then say, now, here's some follow-on questions. Be in a group of 3 or 5 or 2 people and discuss those questions. Because it's not a matter of, here is the teaching, here's the teacher, make sure you understand what the teacher is saying, as much as it is, take what you've been offered and make it your own and explore it together. And this promotes not only original thinking and thoughtfulness on the part of each individual, but it also promotes speaking and listening and relationship. So in all our groups, we really emphasize relationship, horizontal relationship among the students. And I'm trying to, as a teacher for the group, be part of the group rather than apart from it. Practically speaking, there are difficulties with this, and so we have to do the best we can, but in spirit, that's the attitude. So I completely agree with Thich Nhat Hanh on this point. But it's a tricky business because I think there is a place for people with experience, and there's, in our tradition, we have empowerment rituals that we honor and that seem important. And that does set people apart, some people who have been through the rituals and others who haven't. And there seems to be a power and a virtue in that for the benefit of everyone. So it's tricky. And I think that you'll never, ever go beyond some dynamic interplay between hierarchy and non-hierarchy. And being creative about that and understanding that dynamic is really important for our time. So for instance, I'm a parent. Well, a parent has to parent. It wouldn't be good to have a family meeting where children and parents have the same, because parents have a different perspective from children. On the other hand, if a parent doesn't know how to let go and let the child be fully autonomous when the time comes, then that's bad parenting. So somehow we have to, without trying to indicate that the teacher is a parent of the students who are like children, I'm not saying that, we need a dynamic between, there's power always, some power, and can there be power for the good? Can there be, right now it looks like power equals something negative, because it seems to turn out that way. Even in spiritual groups, it seems to turn out that way. So what about power for good? What would that be like? I think that's what we need to discover, and that's why emphasis on the Sangha is so important. So of course Thich Nhat Hanh is right. I think more emotions. I think I'm much more emotional now than I was when I was younger. And I find that's something beautiful. I appreciate that. There's lots more positive emotions, more happiness, more joy, more delight, but also negative emotions, much more sorrow. I'm much more affected by things that happen. I used to just ignore a lot of, not even notice, and now I notice things that happen. If someone is in pain, I really notice that, and it makes me feel bad. If someone does something beautiful for someone else, I notice that, and it makes me feel happy and very moved, sometimes to tears. So I have a lot more emotion than I used to have, and I appreciate that. I think it's kind of nice. It makes life more interesting and more worth living. The famous phrase in Zen, chop wood and carry water, what is that saying? That is saying, the phrase comes in response to some question like, what is enlightenment? Chop wood and carry water. Live your daily life. The practice is everywhere. It's being with everyone in the ordinary world. So Zen is saying the opposite of something hermetically sealed, and it means it. It means it. It's serious. So, in fact, Zen practice is a tradition that fully honors connection to the world and ordinary everyday life and other people. So I think that the reputation that it has is a little bit outmoded. And I notice this, that Zen is not so, it appears, people think of it as being esoteric, too tough, too insular. So in a certain way I appreciate that, because it means that not so many people show up, and that's good. Because if there was too many people, it would be difficult to manage. It's hard to be intimate with a group of 100 people. So when we have smaller groups, it's better. But I think that this image of Zen is changing. Now we have several associations of Zen teachers, national associations of Zen teachers, and mostly, most of the Zen teachers are very open, very experimental, very much getting involved in community life wherever they live. So I think it'll take probably a generation for the reputation to catch up to itself. And also, we have to remember that we're talking about a very new tradition. And in the beginning, there was a lot of need to follow what was communicated to us by our Asian teachers. So we were trying to reproduce, what they taught. And it takes a generation or two for us to feel confident enough to say, okay, good, we feel like we have digested what we've received, and now we have to offer it, in a way that's makes sense for our culture. But this is a very tricky business, because on the one hand, if you want transformation, you can't just say, well, let's go along with the way things are and offer a teaching that people will easily be able to understand and easily be able to use, because then, well, that just folds into the craziness that is American life. So how do you, on the one hand, offer a teaching that really does speak to people and really is relevant, and at the same time is challenging for people to really revolutionize their lives? And that's hard to manage and a tricky business. So that's what we're trying to do. And it's not just Zen that's trying to do this. There are 1,001, or 10,000 or 100,000,000 manifestations of spiritual practice now in the Western world. It's there in religious traditions, traditional ones, Christianity, Judaism, Islam are going through their own foment and debate. The new traditions that new to the West, Advaita, Indian traditions, Asian traditions, and Far East Asian traditions. Psychology, which has been spiritualized by all this going on. There's a million kinds of workshops and trainings, and everywhere you look, even my dentist is a guru, does dentistry as a spiritual practice. So everywhere you look, there are all these manifestations of spirituality, and hopefully it begins to make a difference, and we begin to have a kind of consensus about what works and what doesn't, what's real and what isn't, and everybody can find a way to practice. Now, even right now, there's so many ways. It's kind of exciting and interesting. Also a little confusing. Who am I? I don't know. Really and truly, I don't really know. I'm living this life, but who is there is many things arising. In this moment, you. So who am I now is more you than anything else, because what do I see? I don't see my own face. I see your face. What is in my mind reacting to you? So in this moment, who I am is you. But then our interview will be over, and then I won't be you anymore.